that this thing was so powerful. He said that I forgot how many miles away they were from the actual launch site, but he said when you look through the lens of this thing, all you could see was the gimbal on the rocket engine. It was that tight. And then he said the clouds came in, and when they launched this thing, they started filming, and the camera and lens automatically started tracking the rocket. And they didn't have to worry about it, so it just started tracking. All they could see was, he said, a plume coming up, or trail coming up through the clouds, going up into the sky off in the distance. So then he said after the rocket had successfully launched, they packed everything up, they came back, turned the film in, and thought that was the end of it. He says that he got called into a meeting with one of his commanding officers. And he said there was some other guys in there in suits. He didn't know who they were. And his commanding officer said, "Were you guys screwing around up there?" And he said, "No, sir, what are you talking about?" And he said, "Look at this." And now he's playing back the film that they shot. And he's really amazed at how well this camera was tracking and how close they were in on this rocket as it's going up.
Keep right
and
then turn right.
He said this thing is, it's going thousands of miles an hour up into the stratosphere.
Turn right.
And he's amazed at how crystal clear it is. But then he says all of a sudden he sees this typical saucer-shaped craft with the dome on it zip into the picture, starts pacing with the rocket. It was effortless. It came in, started pacing with the rocket. It shoots a blue beam at it. Shoots a blue beam at the rocket. It moves around to the other side, zips around to the other side, shoots a blue beam at the rocket, zips around to the other side, shoots a blue beam at it, and then takes off out of the frame. And the rocket tumbles, the little warhead tumbles out of space, from outer space. It just starts tumbling and
get ready to
boom.
Turn right.
And his superior officer said,
Turn right.
"What do you make of that?" And he said, "Well, it looks like you got a UFO." And he said, that's when the superior officer said, "You're not to talk about this. You didn't see this," etc. And he was just dumbfounded by what he saw, because whatever zipped into the picture and started pacing with the rocket, he said that was technology nothing like he had seen before. And I think that was in the 60s. Anyway, if that was supposed to be a dummy warhead, why did this craft come into the picture and knock it out? Maybe it wasn't a dummy warhead. Maybe that was the lie. Maybe it had a live warhead on it, and the craft came in to take it out because they were going to do something they knew they shouldn't be doing. Because I heard rumors that they were going to nuke the moon or something stupid like that. And if that was part of that project where they were going to send a nuke to the moon, maybe to the dark side, and nuke the other side, these guys knew that this was going to happen, and they sent their craft in to knock it out. But Robert Jacobs was just one of many who had stories like that. At the National Press Club, there was having a brain fart, of course, on names. There was John Callahan. He was the third-ranking guy in the FAA during the Reagan administration. There was, Clifford Stone. He was part of crash retrieval, and he's telling his story about how they would go out, retrieve the craft, take precautions, the things they encountered, stuff like that.
Turn right.
Well, one of the things that I did when Ted Koppel gave me the opportunity to do Project Disclosure, he assigned Richard Harris, another producer of Nightline, to me. And the wild thing is that Richard Harris went to Northwestern University. And as I said earlier, I went to Northwestern High School. I thought that was okay. That's a big coincidence. And then Richard Harris is telling me when we're talking, he said he had this professor. He said this guy was weird. He came in talking about UFOs almost every day, talking about UFOs. And I said, oh yeah? And what was his name? His name was
Get ready to turn left.
J. Allen Hynek.
Turn left.
I fell out laughing. I said, you had the father of the Close Encounters of the Third Kind for a professor. I said, okay, was Ted trying to be funny by signing him? But Richard and I knew each other because sometimes when Ted would drop me off at my car after the show, and the one night Richard was riding with us because Ted was taking him to drop him off, and we were talking about stuff, and so Richard and I were pretty familiar with each other. But I found that was really interesting. So one of the things that I did was I called John Callahan and talked to him on the phone. And he's telling me about the Japan airline flying back over Alaska. It was a cargo plane. And the pilot radios the tower that he's being shadowed by some large craft. And on radar, the tower sees a return coming back, but they can't make out what it is. But as the pilot's calling out, it's above me, it's below me, it's to the left, it's to the right, they see it in the exact position on radar. Now Callahan explains to me how radar actually looks at the return and can classify the return as, oh, this must be a 747. Oh, this must be a 707. Oh, this must be a Cessna. And it classifies it that way. But he said when you get something outside that criteria, it keeps trying to classify it, and then it gives up and takes it off the radar and marks it as a weather anomaly.
Exit right.
But every time this thing went behind the plane and came from back out from behind it, the radar would start trying to classify it all over again. And this went on for 30 minutes. Now this cargo plane is a 747. The pilot said plane was dwarfed by this thing. He said this thing was the size of 2 aircraft carriers in the sky. It looked like a walnut turned on its side with the rim going around the center. He said there was smaller craft coming and going from this thing. The tower tells him to make a wide turn and make a 360-degree wide turn till he came back on the course to see if they could shake this thing. This thing stayed with them the whole 360 degrees of the turn. So after a while this thing left, and I think the story is that it went and followed another plane or something. But then after they landed, Callahan's job was to go investigate this. What he did was he went and got the radar disc, which records the radar as it's recording everything. He got the audio tapes of the conversation between the cockpit and the pilots. I mean, the pilots and the tower. And he synchronized them, played them back, and he videotaped the radar screen while also recording the audio on the videotape of the communications. He said he took this tape to the #1 guy in the FAA, Admiral Ingen, because he was the #3 guy. He was the third ranking guy in the FAA during the Reagan administration, and Ingen was the #1 guy during the Reagan administration. He thought that Ingen was just going to look at this for a short period of time and dismiss the whole thing. But Ingen told his secretary, hold all my calls, and he sat there and watched the entire thing. Then he said, Callahan said, it was a few days or a week later, he can't remember exactly when, he said they had this huge meeting. There was 3 guys from Reagan's scientific staff, 3 guys from the FBI, 3 guys from the CIA, and a whole bunch of other people They were scientists of some type, but he didn't know who they were. And they were all excited because they never had 30 minutes worth of UFO data on radar before. He said they had to print out from the 30 minutes of radar data. And he said when you print out 30 minutes of radar data, he said these boxes took up the whole wall and went to the ceiling. He had the video, synchronized video. He had transcripts signed by the pilot, co-pilot, and the tower people. He said they went over all of this stuff, and at the end of the meeting, one of the guys from the CIA stood up and said, this incident never happened, this meeting never took place, and we're confiscating all of this. And they took everything. But on his desk, he had the original videotape, he had the original transcripts, he had the original, one box of original radar data printout. And when he retired, they packed all this stuff up and he took it home. And now he wanted to blow the whistle. And that's exactly what he did. So he's telling me that story. And then remember I said they love telling you a second story. He says to me, you remember when we moved from the old national radar system to the new national radar system? And I said, yeah, there was a big controversy about that. He said, yeah, it was so full of errors that it scared him. He didn't want to fly. But he said one day he was coming back on a flight from somewhere and he had this idea. Well, if we treat this like baseball stats, we can say, oh, the system was 98% efficient today, or the system was 92% efficient today. He said it got all the way down into the 70s. It was so bad. But he said, this is what we told you guys, but you never caught on. Meaning, that's what they told the media. And the media never challenged it or questioned it or anything. They gave him a $10,000 bonus for coming up with that. Again, stuff like that, people go, I don't believe that. This is the third ranking guy in the FAA. Okay? He's telling me the story of what was going on.
Okay,
and this is the kind of stuff I said goes on behind the scenes and people don't get privy to it. The public is kept in the dark on a lot of stuff. And we need to know what's going on because it's our lives. A lot of it's our lives. When it came down to flight, what was it, Pan Am Lockerbie flight, and they had the bomb on board, and they knew it was a bomb threat, but they didn't tell the passengers. They could have said, hey, we have a bomb threat. You fly at your own risk. Oh, no, it'll put the airlines out of business. No, you tell the passengers, let them make the decision whether to fly or not. And a lot of the people that will still have flown, they would have said, well, that ain't going to deter me. I'm going to fly. I got to get home or whatever. But you give them that choice. They took it away from them by not telling them they had a bomb threat. And that plane blew up and a lot of people were lost. But they didn't do that again.
Did they get sued? Did they get sued? They should have been.
Yeah. I think there were some lawsuits that came out of that. But the next time they had one, oh, they told people. They told people, we have a bomb threat. They got up and actually told them. And they may have had maybe a handful of people, maybe 5 or 6 people that said, I'm not going to fly today. There was no bomb that went off in the plane. Plane landed fine. But the 5 people chose the option not to fly. And that was their prerogative. Right now, this is the same thing that's going on with this whole UAP, UFO stuff, all right? Give us the choice to say, we want to know. You tell us. Don't be giving us redacted paperwork going, well, it's classified. No. Tell us what's going on. I guess they don't see this as, treason against the American people because they don't need to know. They're going to panic. It's going to upset the apple cart that we've had control of all this time. They're going to want to know who these people are. They're going to want to know what the technology is. They're going to want this. Yeah. But we have the right to know.
Reroute.
Okay, so I'm coming to the bottom of the hour. I'm going to make sure I move
When
on.
possible.
So now,
Making
let's talk about alternative energy. I stood in the control room at ABC, watched the spot come through. It was going to one of our ABC affiliates in Ohio. And a guy named Stan Myers had come up with a way to convert water to hydrogen using very little current. And he's driving around in a dune buggy with a tank full of water. Now, this is supposed to be impossible. It takes as much energy to tear the hydrogen and oxygen apart as what you get when you combine it back together.
Let's find a new
So you're not really getting anything out of it. And that's the lie. Stan Myers was using high voltage and resonant frequency. And when you hit resonant frequency, stuff tears itself apart. And if anybody remembers the Ella Fitzgerald commercial, where she sings and holds a note and it shatters the crystal glass, that's resonant frequency because she matched the frequency of the glass and it tore itself apart. And that's what Stan Myers was doing with his device. And Stan Myers said he calculated he could drive from LA to New York on 22 gallons of water. Then the Pentagon came to him, asked him if he could build a tank that would run on gas or water. That's what the number 25 is. If you click on Keith 2 in the fast links, it'll take you to the second page of images under The Other Side of Midnight. It's a nice show. And you'll see Stan Myers' water-powered car. Now, Stan Myers was a tinkerer, and he loved building things. His twin brother was a real engineer who stopped a meltdown at a nuclear power plant and some other stuff, from what I understand. Don't have the whole story. But he knows what he's doing. When Stan Myers had the Pentagon come to him, they asked him if he could build a tank to run on gas or water, and he set up a $70 million contract to do that with them. Then he wanted the water to come right up to the cylinder before getting converted. He did it. The device replaced your spark plug, and he said it would cost $1,500 to retrofit your car to run on the water. You'd pay $1,500 to convert your car to run on water, wouldn't you? Because then you could, you could collect water in a barrel and have enough water to drive for the rest of the year.
Wow.
This is the kind of technology that was there, and I watched this spot and I'm going, we're in an energy crisis. Why isn't this story a national story? Why is it just this local story going to Ohio? Because you keep it compartmentalized. If you get too many people looking at this, you're going to have the curious trying to duplicate it. And the more people you have duplicating it, guess what? You're going to have
Less money they make.
somebody's going to improve on it, make it better. It's going to get marketed, and the oil companies are going to be SOL. And what can they do? But they don't want that to happen. That messes up the economy. It throws off the way things are balanced. Oil would become useless at that point, except for plastics and maybe paving roads or whatever. But hey, they didn't want it. And then May 9th, 2001, while I was at the National Press Club at Stephen Greer's Project Disclosure, a guy tells me about Stan Myers was at a restaurant meeting with some investors. He jumps up, grabs his throat, said they poisoned me, ran out of the restaurant, got halfway down the street and dropped dead. That's his story. But his twin brother is supposed to be continuing his work, but we haven't heard anything. Then there's Troy Reed. He came through on a spot going out to an affiliate in Ohio. He came up with the Reed magnetic motor. That's number 26, 27, 28, and 29. And if you go down through that, 26, you see Troy Reed on the right in his plaid shirt, and that's his son on the left side of the Reed magnetic motor. And this thing, you crank this sucker up, it picks up speed, gets to a speed that it wants to run at, and it just keeps running, and it turns this generator on the table that's behind, mounted on the table behind the generator that Troy's standing on the side of, and it generates electricity enough to run his drill, vacuum cleaner, Christmas tree lights, etc., and it just keeps running. It just keeps running off of magnetic repulsion and a feedback loop that goes down off of the generator to a 12-volt battery charger that runs a little motor in the back to keep this thing going. But the 4 silver cylinders, gold cylinders at the top of this thing, because this thing looks like something out of the 1800s, Back to the Future or whatever. And they have springs in them. And the 2 flywheels that you see on the left and right, they turn the crankshaft that moves the rods up and down to push these pistons up into those cylinders. And on one stroke, the rod in the cylinder gets pushed up and locks into place. On the next stroke, that rod comes up, it pushes that rod in the cylinder again, it releases it, and the spring pushes down, pushing on that rod, pushing the magnets as they approach each other to the other side, so that they then repulse and go in one direction, sling on. And this thing is just, and it starts running and it picks up speed. And it works. But then he refined it from this 10-foot tall wooden device down to this 18-inch diameter device that looks like a big motor. And he went from mechanical repulsors to induction coils. And this puts out more energy than this big 10-foot tall wooden device. And it is more efficient, and he can tune this thing perfectly, and it runs. And picture number 27 is me standing next to it, because Richard and I went out to visit Troy. And I got to meet Troy and his son, and then I found out who Troy's cousin was, because I got to meet him, because Hoagland and I got picked up at the airport in a limousine. And I'm like, a limousine? Who's sending us a limousine? And he turns out that he is the cousin of Dennis Weaver. And for you younger generation don't know who Dennis Weaver is, there was a show called Gunsmoke, and he played Chester on Gunsmoke before Festus came along. And he also played McCloud on the series McCloud. And he was actually financing his cousin Troy with all his inventions. Troy was an inventing fool. I'm going to have to pick this up after the break. You're on the other side of midnight, and you're listening to me, Keith Morgan, and Cynthia. And right now we are about to go into break. And when we come back, I will pick up where I left off.
Then exit right.
And hopefully you guys are enjoying me talking about this stuff, because I've got a lot of stuff in my head after working with ABC all that time. And we'll be back.
T X D.
Go straight on.
TheOtherSideOfMidnight.com.
Go straight on.
Tune in to listen to Richard C. Hoagland and his fascinating guests. Join Club 19.5 to get access to exclusive member benefits. As a Club 19.5 member, you'll gain access to the rest of this show and all previous 350 episodes. Membership costs $9.95 a month, 33 cents a day. Support the broadcast that provides you with the most interesting conversation available. Talk radio at the cutting edge of science and thought. TheOtherSideOfMidnight.com.
TheOtherSideOfMidnight.com. Talk radio with pictures on demand. Liberate your hyperdimensional time scale and non-linearly access over 400 hours of conversation at the cutting edge of science and thought. Join Club 19.5 to get access to exclusive content that fits your interests and time schedule. Filter episodes by guest or subject. Membership costs $9.95 a month, 33 cents a day. Listen while you travel or as an environment to your endeavors. 8 cents an episode, 2.5 cents per hour of content. TheOtherSideOfMidnight.com.
Welcome back
Keep
to the
running.
other side of midnight. Tonight we've got a show called Personal Encounters with the Third Kind. And Keith Morgan, our sound engineer, is sharing his broad spectrum of experience. And he's now into energy and energy devices. So Keith, I'm turning it back to you.
Okay. So we're talking about, last thing I was talking about was Troy Reed and the Reed magnetic motor, which we were looking at pictures 27 to 29. And like I was saying, Troy is he's an inventing fool. He had all kinds of
Keep
stuff
left and then turn left.
that just, I was like, how did you come up with this stuff? If you go to
Turn left.
picture 28, and you'll see me standing next to what he calls the Surge. Now, the Surge is an electric car. It did have a gas engine in it, but he took out the gas engine, put in an electric motor, put in some electric controllers, and so forth, and he got this electric car. Thing is that if you look at that picture, you'll see a little trailer. This is a motorcycle sidecar on a two-wheel trailer being towed behind the car. What that is a generator. And it was a aircraft starter generator, and it puts out high current and low voltage. And he said he was going to modify it so it could put out high voltage and low current, and all the naysayers were going, "Oh, you can't do that. That's impossible. You can't do that." But he pulled it off. He then mounted this aircraft starter generator in this sidecar on these two wheels, used a motorcycle chain to connect the generator to the axle so that when he's pulling this behind the car, it's now
And then
turning the
turn
generator using the power from the wheels on the under the sidecar. And
Turn
when he's
right.
at 35, 40 miles an hour, somewhere around there, it's generating enough electricity to charge the batteries and run the motor. So when you're doing like highway speeds, this thing is continuously running the motor and charging, keeping the batteries charged. And that was a concept
right,
that was
and then
another one of
continue
those,
straight
oh,
on.
you can't do that. You're violating this law and that law of thermodynamics.
Go straight on.
But he did it. And picture 29, you see Dennis Weaver and Richard Hoagland. And Troy was gonna he was gonna perfect this car, and Richard suggested to him that he incorporate the generator inside the car, and then work from there. And I should have spoke up, and I should have said, no, just batten down the hatches on everything. Make sure all the electrical connections are good. Make sure all of the other nuts and bolts are tightened down so this thing can do a long journey. And then you drive this from here to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue with an ultimatum to the president saying, get the car manufacturers to beat this, because this is the longest electric car ever drive that I'm doing. And then you mothball it after you've driven from Oklahoma to DC, and then you drive all the way back to California, and then from California you drive back to Oklahoma. Once you've done that, of course, you alert the Guinness Book of World Records first and have them track you as you do this. You're making the longest electric car drive without ever recharging. And once you pull that off, then I think we've got something going. Then you can incorporate the motor inside the car. But he went with Richard's suggestion because I didn't open my mouth like I should have and said, hey, now drive it as it is, get it to where it's going, get some backing, and put this in the Smithsonian and build a new one with the generator inside the car. And I didn't say anything because I'm always in the background, and I should have spoke up because I don't make waves until it's time to make waves, and I think it's now time to make waves. So anyway, moving on, we have Denny Klein in Clearwater, Florida. Denny Klein has an electrolysis process just like Stan Myers does, and it separates the hydrogen and oxygen, and he makes what's called Brown's gas, HHO. They've known about Brown's gas since the 40s, late 40s, early 50s, somewhere around there, maybe a little bit before. It's just hydrogen and oxygen, but it's a serious gas. It will cut through anything, tungsten, titanium, steel, you name it, it'll match the temperature of whatever it's cutting through, and it'll cut through it. So his patent is for his technique, but he uses it like acetylene. So one day he says, let me try it in my car. So he rigs his car to run on the gas. He drove 100 miles on 4 ounces of water. I didn't say 4 gallons, I said 4 ounces of water.
That's amazing. That's awesome.
And that kind of technology definitely would have put the car companies out of business. I mean, not the car companies, but the gas companies out of business. It would have made the car companies have to take a different turn and go a different direction, and they didn't want to do that. And people say, oh, the gas companies and the car companies, they're not in bed with each other. Yeah, they are, because they're dependent on each other. The car companies need the gas from the oil companies, and the oil companies need the money from the car companies to keep doing what they're doing. Yeah, they're all playing this game. I remember Ted was dropping me off at my car one night, and I said, Ted, I think the cigarette companies have a conspiracy going. Keith, do you really think the tobacco industry has a conspiracy going? And I'm thinking, yeah, because there's people blowing the whistle on them and nobody's paying the peons any attention. And then when the guy at the top blew the whistle, oh, now it's a story? I'm sitting there going, why don't you listen to the peons, the people who do this stuff every day, the average Joe, and he's trying to tell you, hey, these guys are doing something they shouldn't be doing, but you're not giving them the time of day. And that's what irritated me. When I would do the presidential elections and they'd fly me up to Manchester to do unilateral, I'm a guy came in one day to the TV station where we were doing the unilateral out of, and he's saying, "Yeah, I'm on the roster for President of the United States," and nobody knew who this guy was, but he was on the roster. And I asked Tom Batag, I said, "Are we going to give him any time?" And he said, "Oh, he doesn't want to be president. He just wants to make a statement." I'm like, okay, but equal time, equal whatever is supposed to be what our motto is supposed to be. But it was stuff like that that just drove me crazy, because I could see what was going on, but there was nothing I could do because I'm behind the scenes and I'm supposed to keep my mouth shut. So I did. So Denny Klein drove 100 miles on 4 ounces of water.
Keep right.
And then there's John Kansas. Now, John Kansas is picture number 31 and 32. 32 is actually John Kansas, but above is what he discovered. Now, what he really discovered, and there's a 60 Minutes piece on this if you want to go look it up. He woke up in the middle of the night with an idea for curing cancer. And the idea was you float nanoparticles of metal in the body so they attract and attach to the cancer cell. Then you hit the body with a radio frequency, heating up the metal, killing the cancer cell. And the doctors in the 60 Minutes piece are going, why didn't we think of this before? Here's the rat's tumor before the treatment, here's the rat's tumor after the treatment. And it's clearly killing the tumor, leaving the healthy tissue alone. But they didn't talk about the other thing he discovered. A friend of his came to him and said, you think this will work with desalinization? So he takes a test tube of salt water, he puts it in front of the radio beam, sees these gases coming up out of the tube, takes a lighter, lights the gases, and now he's got a flame of almost 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit coming up out this test tube. Then I don't know if it was dumb luck or he figured it out, but he took a paper towel and he put it in the test tube with the salt water. All he had to do was turn on the beam and it ignited all by itself with no external ignition. You turn it off, it stops. You turn it on, it starts. But
what's causing it to ignite?
Some chemical reaction with whatever's in the paper towel.
I mean, because, we're in the kitchen, we're using water and paper towels all the time. They're not just spontaneous combusting. So what's happening?
It's the radio frequency that's hitting the salt water. Now, remember, it was giving off the gases, and then he would take a lighter and light the gases coming up out of the test tube. But once he put the paper towel in there, whatever it was, the paper towel was the catalyst to start the ignition process. And the amazing thing is, the paper towel never burned, but it started the catalyst. No, is right. It did.
No, that doesn't make sense.
I know. Tell me about it. What kind of technology is that? The paper towel never burned, but it started the catalyst to give us that 3,000 degree flame. And I'm going, we could take this simple technology, upscale it, and retrofit every coal-fired power plant and every nuclear power plant in the world, because what are we doing? We're burning coal to boil water to make steam to turn turbines. What are we doing with nuclear reactors? We're boiling water to make steam to turn turbines. And at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, you could get water to boil almost instantaneously. And I'm going, most of the power plants are sitting next to water. And if it's not salt water, you bring in a trainload of salt, you make your saltwater fuel, and you get your saltwater flame, and you boil your water. And when you boil, when you're using those gases coming out of there, you don't get carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and all these other pollutants. You get mainly water vapor. Much cleaner, much safer. And I'm going, if Fukushima had been running on this technology, salt water,
Keep left and then turn left.
if the tsunami had hit it, it would have just been salt water going back into salt water. It would have been
Turn
no
left.
damage, no explosions, no radiation releases, none of that. Why can't we use clean
Turn
energy
right.
like this? Why do we have to use dirty energy like nuclear?
Turn right.
Please, this is technology that they didn't want to touch. Again, he's violating this law and that law of energy conservation. No, he's not. He's using a small amount of energy to tap into a larger source, and that's all he's doing. You do that with an atomic bomb, and everything's fine. You can't do that unless you use nuclear. No, we don't live in a nuclear universe. We live in an electromagnetic universe. And if you can do it on a nuclear scale, you can do it on an electromagnetic scale. So stop telling us this lie. Let's get off of this. Move on. Now, here's the story. I came in early to work one day, and GM had 2 fuel cell vehicles outside of ABC.
Keep right, and then
And I'm
turn
talking
right.
to the guy from GM, because Head of the Curve is doing a spot about these fuel cell vehicles. And I said, so what did you guys do to these things? Oh, we took out the engine, we dropped in an electric motor, put in a 97 kilowatt fuel cell, and a tank to hold the hydrogen. I looked at him and said, do you know about Stan Myers? Yeah. Denny Klein? Yeah. John Kansas? Oh, well, that name doesn't strike a bell. The guy woke up in the middle of the night with an idea for curing cancer. Oh, yeah. The guy burning salt water with radio frequencies. Yeah, I know all about him. I looked at him and I said, well, if you know about him, that means GM knows about him. If GM knows about him, how come this thing's running on hydrogen instead of water? Oh, conspiracy theories. I said, no, every word that comes out of my mouth is a fact. Oh, well, you know, people come to us with these ideas and concepts, and it takes time to implement them. I said, how hard is it to get a bunch of brains together and go, let's make this work? And it was a few days or a week later, number 33, this Japanese company introduced their fuel cell car. You drive at 50 miles an hour for 1 hour on a liter of water. You pour the water into your electrolysis device, the hydrogen goes to the fuel cell, and off you go. And I'm like, wasn't this what I was telling the idiot from GM? It's not rocket science. They don't want to do it. They never wanted to do it. We could have been running on water a long time ago. But then you got people like this one lady I was telling, we should be running on water. We should be pumping water out of the ocean for drinking, irrigation, and fuel. And she says, well, what if we use up all the water in the ocean? I said, what did I tell you get when you burn hydrogen? You get water vapor, no carbon dioxide, no carbon monoxide, none of these pollutants. You get water vapor. It's clouds. It's going to rain back down.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then you get these environmentalists going, yeah, well, see, if you get these fuel cell vehicles dripping water everywhere, it's going to add to the global warming. I'm like, what? How do you... What's easier, getting carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and other pollutants out of smoke, or capturing some water vapor and running it through a coil to cool it down, condense it back into water vapor, and putting it back into the system? Which is harder? No, it's... Come on. And even if you drove, every man, woman, and child on the face of the planet drove 100 miles a day on 4 ounces of water, it would still not be equivalent to the amount of water that rains down in one area, like DC, in an hour with a good downpour, okay? There's no way. But this is the kind of stuff that they want to keep feeding to everybody. There's more evaporation from the ocean, from the sun, every day than it would be from what we would be putting into the air with fuel cell vehicles. But this is the crap they've been handing us the whole time. Okay, moving on, because we're like 10 minutes out from the end of show. Okay, so Ted Koppel did a book called Lights Out, and hopefully I can get him on the show if you and I host it, and maybe he'll say okay, because he said I drove him crazy with the talk about Hoagland. But what he's talking about in Lights Out is EMP, an electromagnetic pulse that would virtually render our electrical grid null and void. Even a good solar flare, a massive solar flare, would knock out our electric grid. But there's technologies standing in the wings to actually change that. We've got solid state batteries, and we've got the Bloom box, and we've got a whole bunch of other things that could probably change the way we generate electricity. It's a centralized system that we have now. We have the power plant, and we've got these long transmission lines to send the power down the lines, but it's centralized. That's why somebody could hack the power plant and knock part of the grid down, or most of the grid, or really do some damage, knock the whole entire grid out. But technological developments like the bloom box, that would make electricity a distributed principle instead of a centralized principle. It would be, you'd be able to take the bloom box and put them at substations in neighborhoods, eliminating the long distance transmission lines. You feed these boxes any kind of gas, butane, methane, propane, hydrogen, natural gas. You just feed them a gas, you feed them air, and you get electricity out. And 60 Minutes did a piece about the bloom box. And in the 60 Minutes piece, Leslie Stahl's interviewing the CEO of eBay, and he's showing her their 5 boxes they have out on the concrete slabs. And these things, he says, are producing 15% of the campus electricity, but based on how much they're putting out and what we're using, they're actually putting out 5 times more than we're actually using. In the 9 months that we've had these in place, we've saved over $100,000. She called them 3 months later, and he says, yeah, we've saved over $200,000 in 1 year because they're using methane, which is landfill gas. Cow poop puts out, all poop puts out methane, and you just collect that gas. You know, even a compost pile puts out methane, and you take that methane, use it to power your bloom box. Or you could take solar panels, do conversion on water, do electrolysis on water, and use the hydrogen to run your bloom box. So there's multiple ways of running this box, and the box would be the size of your air conditioning condenser that's outside right now, and it would power your home. And you'd feed it, most houses have natural gas, you feed it natural gas. And if you don't have natural gas, you could bring in a tank of propane, run it that way, or you could have any other fuel.
Then turn right.
So anyway, those are some of the technologies that are standing on the door to really do some stuff here.
Keep left.
What else do I want to talk about? Okay, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, the last pictures in my sequence. You're looking at Göbekli Tepe in 34, 35, and 36. This was discovered back in 1994. When they dug it up, they found all of this stonework and dated it to 12,000 years ago, when we were supposed to be hunter-gatherers. Who pulled this off? And they said, well, they buried it for some reason. These are temples. They're not temples. I think those are celestial landing sites, and these pillars were supports for when the craft would set down on them, and then the people would come out from underneath. But what buried them? Why did they bury them? I think the flood that really took place, which was a huge tsunami, not raining for 40 days and 40 nights. The 40 days and 40 nights came after the tsunami, which was so huge they could see it from space encompassing the planet, took place. It buried this. It buried Easter Island, the statues on Easter Island, up to their necks. Why do you build a statue that big and then bury it up to its neck? It buried the pyramids in Bosnia and in Teotihuacan. All of this stuff had to be unearthed, okay? Because this stuff got buried in the original flood. And when you get a tsunami moving that huge, moving through the atmosphere, you get a lot of evaporation, and then it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. So the story isn't quite right. That's an alternate history that we're dealing with here. 37 and 38, they found these little delta wing aircraft models in tombs. And the scientists are going, oh, those are representations of insects. No, they're delta wing aircraft. When I showed these to my son, he was like 3 years old, he said, those are airplanes. 3-year-old knows an airplane when he sees it. You got a wheel, you got an engine underneath, you got a pilot sitting up in the front on 37. And when do you have an insect with a vertical tail fin? That's not what these are, okay? These are not insects. They are exactly what we're looking at, and they would probably be built by the Anunnaki. So, moving on, let's go to Japan. Underwater pyramid. They're saying, oh, this is a natural formation. You got parallel lines that are just too sharp and too precise to be that. Then when you go to the top of this thing, picture 41, that's at the top. How do you get curves like that? 42 is me outlining the top. That's not natural.
Keep left.
How do you sit and go, that's natural? No, you're in denial. And let's get to 43. 43 was Chariots of the Gods 2. Eric von Daniken, who's standing there, duplicated the relief on the wall in Addis Ababa, I think it is, in Egypt. And they said, this is a light bulb. So he duplicated it, put a high voltage in it. And when I saw that thing live, that electron beam, you normally can't see it in a vacuum tube, but this is not a vacuum. It's got gas in it. I don't know which gas or if it's just air. But when he turned that thing on, that electron beam serpentined over to the hands. When it struck the hands, it straightened up and ionized the air, and then the air glowed like a neon light. And at that moment, I felt like I personally put that image on that wall myself, okay? Because if I was going to draw what I had just seen, that's what I would have drawn. So the Egyptians had the light bulb. They probably had batteries too, but that was the glass battery. This is a new technology that we're about to get. And then picture 45, that is an Inca building, and it was built like an observatory. So that's what I'm calling is the Cancun Inca Observatory. Who built that? How did they build it? Why did they build it? The history of this planet is not what we think it is. And if you read the Lost Book of Enki, it's not it's a trusted translation of the 14 tablets, which Zachariah Stitchin sold many books on, because I asked him a question about the Anunnaki, or a question about when's Nibiru coming back or something like that. And he said, read the book, read the book.
Keep left.
Which book? You got 5, 6 books out. Which one's got my answer in it? Then just before he passed on, he put out the right book, which is the Lost Book of Enki. When I read that, everything unfolded. Okay, so we're coming to the end of the show, and it's been fun talking to you guys, and hopefully we'll get to do this again, because there's still a lot of stuff in my head. But you're on the other side of midnight. The show is Encounters of the Third Kind, or something close to that. And Cynthia has been the host, and I've been co-hosting. So
Keep left.
it's been great talking to you guys. Have a good night, and we'll see you on the other side.
Keep right, and then exit right. Exit right. Turn left. Get ready to turn left. Turn left. Turn right. It's all over now.